iCatholic Mobile is a 5G wireless provider dedicated to supporting your faith and values, offering unlimited talk and text, reliable data, and plans that support Catholic causes. A portion of every dollar helps sustain the mission of the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. With nationwide coverage, iCatholic Mobile connects you to what matters most. More information is available at iCatholicMobile.com.
iCatholic Mobile underwrites for the Station of the Cross.
Seeking truth and speaking truth. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. Our guest today is Professor Dr. Robert P. George. He's the McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University, a post once held by Woodrow Wilson prior to his presidency. He's also the director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton. He's a prolific writer, and his new book is out, Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth, Law and Morality in Our Cultural Moment. You can learn more about him and his good work over at robertpgeorge.com. Professor George, great to have you back with us today on The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, and thank you. It's a great honor to be back on the show, Jim.
Yes, always an honor to be with you. And so we're going to dive into the book. But first, I do want to begin by reminding everybody about iCatholic Mobile. It's the only Catholic mobile phone company in the U.S. today. When you subscribe to iCatholic Mobile, you do help fund the Station of the Cross. So check out iCatholic Mobile, iCatholicMobile.com. All right. Also, before we dive into the book, Professor George, I'd like to ask you briefly about your work in general to help orient anyone who may not be familiar with it. Overall, how do you describe your views in a sort of shorthand kind of way? Do you accept being called a conservative, or what is your best preferred descriptor of your overall views and why?
Well, the trouble with labels like liberal or conservative is that there's no fixed meaning. They mean different things to different people. They're used in different ways. They mean different things in different places. If you use the word liberal in Latin America, that would connote what we would in America consider a conservative set of economic views. Of course, if you use liberal here in the United States of America, it means something very different from that. Same with the concept of conservative. There are all sorts of different kinds of conservatives. I don't flee from the label conservative. That's fine with me. I try to conserve the principles of the American Constitution and our civic order and the basic moral norms and principles of the great civilization of the West, largely, of course, built by the Catholic tradition. I try to conserve the principles of the tradition as it's been fed by the streams from Athens and Jerusalem. The biblical witness on the one hand, and then the teachings of the great classical thinkers from ancient Rome and Greece, people like Cicero, Aristotle, Plato. I regard myself as a natural law theorist. The school of thought in which I work and situate myself is the one that is referred to as natural law theory. That's a view that has been integrated into Catholic moral teaching, but it really precedes the coming into being of the Catholic Church. It finds its origins in those antique Greek and Roman thinkers that I was talking about, people like Cicero and Aristotle and Plato. I think there's a great deal of wisdom in these traditions, and I do my best to try to explicate them, try to apply those principles that we get from those traditions to our concrete moral problems and political problems of today. And I try to preserve them against the kind of erosion of belief in those principles that has been characteristic of the modern and contemporary periods.
Excellent. How do you see the importance of your role as a political philosopher and legal scholar? You're also a lawyer, but the role of an academic legal scholar is different. Can you help us understand it?
Well, I think all of us, whether you're an academic or not, certainly all of us who are people of faith understand this, that we're called, among other things, to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. We are rational creatures. We are creatures with a rational nature, we human beings. And part of our fulfillment lies in seeking the truth about all sorts of things, but certainly about the most important things, the great questions of meaning and value, of human nature, the human good, human dignity, human destiny, we're fulfilled in no small part by truth seeking. And we're called on to be very determined truth seekers, but we're also called on to be courageous truth speakers. We're called on to speak the truth in season and out of season, when it's convenient and when it's inconvenient, when it makes other people happy and when it makes people not only unhappy, but angry. We're not excused from speaking the truth, even when the truth is unpopular, and even when speaking the truth means making sacrifices. So that's my understanding of the mission of all of us, but I think it's especially stringent in the case of an academic, a teacher, a university professor like myself, for example. It's our job, it's our vocation, it's our calling to model what it means to be a determined truth seeker and a courageous truth speaker. And in part by that modeling, to form the young men and women entrusted to our charge and to our care by their families to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. That's the job. That's the vocation. That's what we're called on to do. And if we're unwilling to do that, then we should go into a different line of work. There are lots of respectable, we can sell cars and insurance and all sorts of other things. Lots of good things that people can do. Nobody has to be a professor. But if you discern your calling to be a teacher, you discern your calling to be a professor, as I discern my calling to be, then there are no excuses. Our job is to form our students to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. And to do that, we've got to model those virtues ourselves.
Yes, Dr. Robert P. George is with us, robertpgeorge.com. And Dr. George, what do you desire your impact to be when it's all said and done, 20, 30 years, many years from now? What do you want to be known for? What would you like the legacy of your good work to be?
Well, I would certainly like it if some of my writings lasted and were useful to people and important to people a generation or two or three or maybe more from now. But if I'm remembered for anything, I suspect it will be less my writings than my students. And I like that. I would love to be remembered as the teacher of, to name some of my most prominent and wonderful and successful students who've gone on to be academics themselves, to be the teacher of Sharif Girgis, or Ryan Anderson, or Melissa Moskella, or Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, or Father Henry Stephen. I've been blessed with such wonderful, wonderful students, and they're my legacy. And I know that they're going to go on to great things because they're doing great things already. And so maybe someday, if my name is remembered at all, it'll be, oh yeah, he's the guy who taught Sharif Girgis or Ryan Anderson or Melissa Moskella or Daniel Mark or Michael Watson or any of the other wonderful students that I've had.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And we have had Dr. Girgis on. He shared some of his story on a Testimony Tuesday with us. Folks can go back and find that. Really terrific stuff. I guess let me ask it this way, though, as well. Is in this book, Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth, is there one argument that is encapsulated in here? Is there an essay in this book that in particular might stand out as something that rises to the top of what you'd want to be remembered for, or even that you would think is the most important of all?
Oh gosh, the book covers quite a range of topics that are important, and each is a topic in its own right, and yet they are kind of sort of melded together. They're integrated. It's an integrated set of essays around a set of themes. And if you ask me what the book is most fundamentally about, it's most fundamentally about what it means to be human, what it means to be a rational creature, what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God, what it means to be called to higher things, what it means to live a life in line with and respectful to the dignity of each and every member of the human family. Those are the ideas that are really at the core of the book. Can I say a word maybe about where the book begins, or the very first chapter, the introduction? So, we've all heard historians break the various epochs, the periods of history, into the age of this and the age of that. And so, for example, historians will tell us that the medieval period was the age of faith. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, they mean that for the great medieval thinkers, whether they're Christians like Thomas Aquinas or St. Anselm, whether they're Jews like Maimonides, whether they're Muslims like Al-Farabi or Averroes, the touchstone of truth and of goodness and of justice and of right for those thinkers was conformity to the faith, conformity to the teachings of religion. Now, that's not straightforwardly false. There's truth in that. It's a little misleading if we take it to mean that the medieval thinkers put such a high premium on faith that they deprecated or denied the importance of reason. They didn't. Certainly all of the thinkers I mentioned across the three great monotheistic traditions, all were believers and practitioners of believers in and practitioners of religion, of reason, and had a high view of reason. Still, there's some truth in the idea that the medieval period was the age of faith. Well, the same historians tell us that the Enlightenment comes along a few centuries later, and that's the age of reason, sometimes the age of science. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, they mean that for the great Enlightenment thinkers, whether in Germany or in France, or Scotland or in England, it's reason that's the touchstone of goodness and truth and justice. And I hear the bell ringing, so I'll have to finish on the other side of the break.
Yeah, there's that music. It pops up in some unfortunate times, but yeah, we're going to be right back with Dr. Robert George more on this great new book he's got, Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth. He writes about it in the preface that the chapters of this book are drawn from essays and other writings that he's published over the past several years. That they represent his best effort to seek the truth and speak the truth about many of what he believes to be the most important and urgent moral, political, and legal issues facing us as a culture. We're going to dive into them more when we get back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Robert George. You can learn more about him and his good work at robertpgeorge.com. We're talking about his book, Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth, Law and Morality in Our Cultural Moment. And we're going to get back to that in just a moment. But first, I do want to let you know that if you are buying or selling a home, there's an easy way to help the Station of the Cross at the same time. Real Estate for Life has 1,400 experienced, morally grounded agents in the U.S. and Canada. Visit realestateforlife.org to find a Christ-centered, experienced realtor near you. And don't forget to mention the Station of the Cross. All right, Dr. George, please dive back in, continue on with what you were sharing with us before the break.
Talking, Jim, about the way historians break up the various epochs into the age of this and the age of that, and I mentioned that many historians refer to the Middle Ages, the medieval period, as the age of faith, and then they refer to the Enlightenment era as the age of reason. And by that, they want to suggest that for the great Enlightenment thinkers, reason was the touchstone of truth, of goodness, of justice, of right. And again, there's truth in that, just as there's truth in the idea that the medieval period was the age of reason, though we have to be careful not to mislead people. It's not as if the Enlightenment thinkers were all, or even a majority were, hardcore secularists. Many were not. I begin that list with Sir Isaac Newton, of course, who was a very devout Christian believer, as well as a great scientist and a great man of reason. But still, there's truth in the idea that the Enlightenment placed a particularly high priority on reason. It was the age of reason. Well, if the medieval period is the age of faith, and if the Enlightenment era is the age of reason, in what age do we live? What is for so many people today, especially young people, what is our touchstone of truth and of goodness, of justice, of right? Well, it's not faith, and it's not reason in so many cases. No, it's neither faith nor reason, nor faith and reason, which is what I think it should be. Rather, it's feeling. We live in the age of feeling, where people think that a reliable source of knowledge of truth and of wisdom is how you feel about things, your emotions. Now, what worries me about that, I think it's deeply, deeply disturbing and dangerous, is that we know that our emotions, all you have to do is look at history and you'll see that people's emotions are a very unreliable guide to truth. They can lead us astray so very easily. Now, it's true that in our fallen condition, even doing our best to be reasonable, our reason is fallible. We can get things wrong. We can misunderstand the teachings of religious faith because we are fallen, fallible, frail creatures. Still, faith and certainly reason are much more reliable guides to truth, to justice, to right, to wisdom, than emotion, than feeling. Emotion and feeling are bound to, if we just rely on them, lead us astray. You might remember that famous line attributed to the movie producer or movie maker Woody Allen, when he ended up caught in an affair with his wife's stepdaughter, and he said, well, the heart wants what the heart wants. He was treating his feelings, his emotions, as a guide to what he ought to really do, to truth, to what's justified, to what's right. The heart wants what the heart wants. Well, the heart, considered as the emotions, really can and does lead people astray. It will lead us astray. It leads us into such notions as the one that's very familiar to you today. I'm sure, Jimmy, I'm sure you've heard people say this, especially young people, not exclusively young people, but especially young people who will say, well, you have your truth and that's true for you, and I have my truth and that's true for me, but there's really no such thing as the truth. There's just your truth and my truth. Well, there's a really bad idea. I mean, do we really want to buy into a notion that, well, Hitler had his truth and Mother Teresa had her truth, and nobody can really adjudicate between Mother Teresa and Hitler? There's no such thing as the truth. Hitler wanted to throw people into ovens and kill them. Mother Teresa wanted to rescue people on the streets of Calcutta, but who's really to choose between the two? There's no rational way of adjudicating that. He had his truth, namely Hitler. She had her truth, Mother Teresa. No, you don't want to go there. There's no your truth and my truth on the issue of slavery. Slavery is either right or wrong, and it was wrong. It wasn't wrong for the people who thought it was wrong and right for the people who thought it was right. So I want to push back, and a central mission of this book is to push back against the age of feeling and this idea that you have your truth and I have my truth and there's nothing but the truth. Among the other faults, Jim, with treating feeling or emotion as a guide to truth and wisdom, is it makes us become very dogmatic and ideological very fast. Because if our emotions are our source of truth, then there's no challenging that. There's no presenting reasons, having an argument, having a discussion, trying to assess the evidence, trying to evaluate the logic of an argument to see where the truth actually is. People become dug into their positions. It's how they feel, and that's it, and nothing can be said about it. So no one's going to be interested in listening to anybody else's argument. They're much more likely to try to shut each other down and not have an argument. It all becomes then a struggle for power, not a common effort to get at the truth when people disagree.
Yes, yeah. And all of this comes out really nicely in the book. Again, seeking truth and speaking truth, law and morality in our cultural moment. And a good example, I think, of this age of feeling that we're in. We see it in the news just over the last few days, some of the headlines. Will the Supreme Court revisit its ruling on same-sex marriage? Supreme Court asked to reconsider ruling on same-sex marriage. So Obergefell back in the news. And Professor George, you have a chapter in this book on what Obergefell should have said. Dr. Girgis, I believe, is part of that as well. Do you think the Supreme Court justices will revisit this? And if so, what is your argument in a nutshell for how they ought to rule and why?
Well, you remember, Jim, that line attributed to Yogi Berra that prediction is really hard, especially when it's about the future. Hard to predict what the Supreme Court is going to do. They have been petitioned to reconsider the Obergefell ruling. That's the ruling that imposed same-sex marriage on all 50 states in the nation. My guess is that they won't use the particular occasion that has come before them now as the one on which to reconsider the case. But I do suspect, if I had to predict, if I had to make one of these risky predictions about the future, I would say that they will reconsider the case, but it's not going to be this year or next year or the year after. It's still a few years down the line. Well, whether I'm wrong about that and they do reconsider it this time, or whether I'm right and they consider it later. If they do get round to considering it, then what they should do is do what they should have done in the Obergefell case in the first place, and that is simply to say this. There is nothing in the text or the logic or the structure or the historical understanding, the original public meaning of the provisions of the Constitution that requires one or another understanding of marriage. The Constitution doesn't define marriage. It does not include a particular conception of marriage. It doesn't adjudicate and make a choice as between the idea of marriage as sexual romantic companionship or domestic partnership on the one side, or marriage as a conjugal union of husband and wife on the other side. It leaves that matter, that question, to the legislative branches, in particular to the state legislatures. And that's why you have always had the marriage law as an area where state law, not national law, not federal law, has controlled. If and when the Supreme Court gets around to reconsidering Obergefell, I hope that it will say, you know what, we made a mistake when we read into the Constitution the idea that there was a national standard or national definition of marriage. There is not. It's up to the individual states acting through the normal processes of deliberative democracy, primarily in the state legislatures, unless you have a state that can resolve these things by referendum and initiative. But working through the constitutionally specified democratic procedures to decide which conception of marriage will be made the law of the state. Now, it could be that Congress will later step in and act and impose a national definition, or the Constitution will be amended to create a constitutional definition. But as things stand, with the Constitution we actually have, there is simply nothing in the text or logic or structure or original understanding that would require any state to have this or that conception of marriage. I'll give you a way of illustrating that. The state of Massachusetts or the state of Mississippi, if it wanted to, consistently with the Constitution, could enact polygamy, could make it lawful to have 2 wives or 3 wives or 4 wives. I think that would be a very, very bad idea. I don't think any state is about to do that anytime soon, although you never know these days. But the Constitution wouldn't forbid it. So what it shows you is that it really is a matter for state action and legislation, not a matter for the courts to impose on the states and on the nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's an entire chapter on this. It's part of the second part of this book on constitutional law and political philosophy. That is probably the section of the book that is most dense. You might need some sort of a legal background to get through some of it. I'll tell you, I was struggling with a bit of it, but there's still, it's worth doing. There's still so much that is in there that is so good, and I think anybody can really get a lot out of part 3. Culture and education. Part 1, as you mentioned, a big section that's all about what it means to be human, the ethical and metaphysical questions about the human person. And then part 4, seekers of truth, bearers of witness. I'm just about up to that one. I'm actually 294 pages in. I think the whole thing clocks in at 347. But there's a lot to think about, a lot of good stuff to chew on throughout this book. Anything you want to say about the particular way the sections are broken up?
Well, let me, in responding to the point you made a moment ago, Jim, share this with your viewers and listeners. When I was putting these essays together as a book, I very much had in mind the need to reach, with these ideas, a broad readership. Now, as a professional academic, as a scholar, as a professor at Princeton, some of what I write for an audience of maybe 300 other scholars in the field, specialists in moral and political philosophy or philosophy of law, my own fields. This is not one of those projects. This is not written for other scholars. It's not filled with academic jargon and stuff like that. And it's written for a general audience. Here I want to bring to the general public, to mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and auntie and uncle and everybody, pastor and preacher and teacher and friend and librarian and coach. The ideas that I've been sharing with my own students at Princeton over the past, really several decades. And I especially had in mind, Jim, trying to reach young people, like my students. So these essays are written in the hope that moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas will share the book with their college or high school, even high school children. They are readable. I have not, as I say, written them in an unreadable academic jargon. And I hope they will challenge the conventional thinking that the culture is kind of showering on our young people in high school and in college, and get them to think their way out of the morass that they get themselves in when they believe, well, there's just your truth and my truth and nothing really that counts as the truth.
Yes, yeah, and in particular that section, part 3, culture and education, a lot of great stuff in there regarding the indoctrination, the pre-indoctrination that takes place on the university level, but then also even the grade school, high school, middle school level before that. A lot of great things to think about and to understand how we ought to think about these things, approach these things, navigate these things. Very, very helpful. A lot of ideas I hadn't fully considered before. A lot of great stuff here. We're going to be right back with Dr. George. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Robert P. George. You can find him over at robertpgeorge.com. We're talking about his newest book, Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth, Law and Morality in Our Cultural Moment. Outstanding work. Again, you can get this wherever you find books. Pass it on to the young people in your midst, but I think you're going to get a great deal out of this as well. One chapter here I want to go to, chapter 9. So equal protection in the unborn child, a Dobbs brief. We've talked about this briefly in the past, this great amicus brief, when we've had Dr. George on in the past about it. He wrote this with also with Professor John Finnis, great part of this as well. And so we've gone through this some. I've read through the amicus brief some. I was surprised to find in this book what is described here as this enhanced amicus brief, and then this supplement to an enhanced amicus brief in Dobbs. It says it retains the broad outline and with minor corrections the whole content of the filed brief while expanding it fourfold with historical material and analysis. So this is what took me some time to get through. It slowed me down a bit. This was the denser part of the book for me, but still very much worth going through. And one point that I'd like you to speak to, Dr. George, that I found some real wonderful gems in here. I think this is one in particular, this aspect where you write about the United States brief never confronts the thesis of this article that Roe could and should be overruled on the ground that the object and victim of an elective abortion is entitled, precisely as a person within the meaning of the Due Process and Equal Protection clauses of the 14th Amendment, to constitutional protection against such a procedure, accepted by Roe itself as a ground that, if sound, collapses its entire holding and rationale. And just to kind of orient folks to this, I'm going to just play, it's about a 1-minute clip just of some of the oral arguments in the Roe case that just highlights what this is about in context, that they actually talked about this, that the entire case would collapse if it was ruled, or if it was decided that the child in the womb was in fact a person, and a bit more. Here's some of that audio from the oral arguments. Here it is.
Roe against Wade.
You would agree, I suppose, that one of the important factors that has to be considered in this case is what rights, if any, does the unborn fetus have?
That's correct.
And the basic constitutional question initially is whether or not an unborn fetus is a person, isn't it? This is critical to this case.
Yes, it is.
If it were established that an unborn fetus is a person within the protection of the 14th Amendment, you would have almost an impossible case here.
I would have a very difficult case.
Certainly would.
Could Texas constitutionally, in your view, declare that by statute that a fetus is a person for all constitutional purposes?
The state could obviously adopt that kind of statute, and then the question would have to be adjudicated.
If it were established that an unborn fetus is a person within the protection of the 14th Amendment, you would have almost an impossible case. It's an impossible case. It's an impossible case. It's an impossible case. It's an impossible case.
All right. So, Dr. George, you write about this in this chapter, and you say that Roe and Casey simply cannot be grievously wrong. This stands and falls with its hidden premise that Roe succeeded in rebutting Texas's assertion of the 14th Amendment rights of the unborn child. So if I'm understanding this correctly, Texas actually did argue this personhood case for the child in the womb. This was basically rejected by the court at that time in the Roe ruling. And then in the Dobbs ruling, the court basically, they undid Roe, but they left in place sort of this, this hidden premise, never answering, who the child in the womb is, or if they are a person or not. They've just kind of left that hanging there. Anything further any further light you can shed on this for us?
Well, yes, Jim, I think I can. Now, the reason for the expansion of the brief is that when you submit a brief to the Supreme Court of the United States, you're given a word limit. So we had to work with a limited number of words. We could not provide to the justices all the evidence we had, the entire avalanche of evidence we had, proving beyond any doubt that the original public meaning of the word person at the time of the ratification of the 14th Amendment, which refers to the rights of persons to due process and equal protection, that the original public meaning of person included the child in the womb. I have no other way to say this. I'm going to be blunt about it. Professor Finnis and I buried the counterargument under an avalanche of evidence. It's a knockdown. There's no question that for the framers and ratifiers of the 14th Amendment, the word person included the unborn child. So then on any responsible original public meaning interpretation of the 14th Amendment, the rights of the child in the womb are protected under that amendment. The unborn have constitutional protection. Now, the court in Dobbs, in overturning Roe versus Wade, did not go as far as Professor Finnis and I asked them in the brief to go. They didn't rule out going there. They still may get there, but they didn't go there, at least this time. What they did, instead of declaring that the unborn child has certain rights under the 14th Amendment, including the right to the equal protection of the laws, which would eliminate the legitimacy of elective abortions, instead of doing that, they returned the matter to the legislative branch. That is, either to the state legislatures or to the Congress. Congress could act pursuant to Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, which gives Congress authority to enforce the guarantees, including equal protection and due process of the first section of the 14th Amendment, where states fail to accord to any persons, born or unborn, due process rights for the equal protection of the laws. So the court did not go as far as we would like them to go. They didn't rule out going there. They didn't say we were wrong. In fact, our brief was cited, I believe, 3 times in different opinions in the case. But at the moment where the law stands is that it is up to the legislature, up to the state legislatures, or if Congress wishes to intervene, to the Congress to decide what the law of abortion will be. Congress has not acted. That means at the moment, it's up to the individual states, and some states, such as Texas, have enacted, and Florida, have enacted highly protective laws protecting the unborn child. Others have elected to permit abortion all the way up to birth, states like Illinois, which is abominable and barbaric and almost beyond belief. But there you have it. So this shows you how extreme the pro-abortion movement in this country has gotten. But the key thing is this. The court said in Roe versus Wade that if the unborn child himself or herself is a person with equal protection and due process rights under the Constitution, then there can be no right to abortion. And what we showed, what Professor Finnis and I showed, again, I submitted as a knockdown. You're welcome to read it. Anybody out there who's hearing my words, welcome to read it and show us what's wrong. Show us any evidence to the contrary. I think it's a knockdown. And if I'm right about that, then the proper resolution of the case would be to declare that the unborn child are protected under the Constitution. There's no right to abortion. On the contrary, there's a right of the child to be protected against lethal violence.
Yeah. The argument is extremely convincing and well made, and I think anyone open-minded who reads through it not only will agree, but will actually be convicted by it. And to say, how can this be? Then this means that we have a sort of a constitutional crisis here. And what are we to do in the face of it? Well, one option that we can do is gather together, stand up together, speak the truth together. So we do want to invite folks to come and join us All Saints Day, Saturday, November 1st. The National Men's March to Abolish Abortion Rally for Personhood in Boston, Massachusetts, where our nation's fight for freedom was born. So just as our founders rose up against tyranny, we must now rise up against this evil of abortion, the violent destruction of our nation's most vulnerable children. Time for a peaceful counter-revolution, really against the sexual revolution that has done so much damage. And so we want to root this sort of counter-revolution in truth, authentic love, and our U.S. Constitution calling for the equal protection of every preborn child under the 14th Amendment. So men, come on off the sidelines. Time to lead. Women, children, families. We invite you to come stand with us. Join us at the Rally for Personhood. All the information is there at themensmarch.com. Dress sharp if you can. Men wear suits, priests and clerics. We'd like to have that professional look, following sort of the model of Martin Luther King Jr. and the way they did it when they were out in the streets. And so let's join together, do what we can on this, themensmarch.com. But also a piece to this is we want to be as educated on this as we can and be able to speak to others about this. Again, you can really go through the whole argument here. Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth is the book by Dr. Robert P. George, Law and Morality in Our Cultural Moment. That's what we're talking about here today. Dr. George, there's lots I can ask you about. I do have some more questions to get to, but I want to make sure to also give you time, just give you the floor, and you share with us what you think is most important to get across today.
Well, Jim, I'll share with your readers something, your listeners and viewers, something that I said to you before we went on the air, and that is the essays in the book that were most fun to write were the ones in that final sections about truth seekers and witness bearers. These are profiles of 5 people that I admire, some from history long ago, some contemporary, who were, in my opinion, great seekers of truth and courageous speakers of truth, bearers of prophetic witness. One was the great Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet dissident, who was exiled to the United States, the great novelist, the great writer who was exiled to the United States. And I talk in my essay on him in the book about the address that he gave at Harvard's commencement in 1978. I was there. I heard the speech over the loudspeaker. I wasn't within the walls. I was outside the walls. I was a Harvard law student at the time, so it wasn't my own commencement. My friend Cornel West was actually receiving his degree that year, so he was actually in the walls and saw and not just heard Solzhenitsyn give the address. But that's where Solzhenitsyn really read the riot act to the American people. He said he was very grateful to America for shielding him from tyranny. He believes in America. He believes in American principles, but he wanted to confront us prophetically with the fact that we were not living up to our own principles, that we weren't living up to the high moral standards of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the broader Judeo-Christian tradition. He talked about the importance of faith in God and how the collapse of faith in God always presages disaster. Here he was echoing another person that I write about in that section, someone who lived long ago in the early 19th century, the German Jewish Christian poet Heinrich Heine, who in 1830, more than 100 years before Hitler came to power, predicted the rise of the Nazis. He didn't say their names. He didn't say there'd be a man named Adolf Hitler with a funny mustache or anything like that. But he foresaw and he foretold the rise of a radical tyranny in Germany precisely because he was witnessing the collapse in the domain of the intellect and spirit of the Christian faith, of the biblical witness. I also, in that section talk about one of my own teachers, the late Joseph Raz, who was one of my doctoral supervisors, along with Professor John Finnis at Oxford University. Professor Raz and I did not agree about lots of things, and yet he taught me to be a determined truth speaker, and he stressed the importance of speaking the truth, whether it was popular or not, as best we understand the truth. We're fallible, we can get things wrong, but it's our obligation to seek the truth and to speak the truth when we are confident that we've got it, the truth. Never be completely confident, of course, because we are fallible. We're frail, fallen creatures. But that was a good model for me. And then I talk about my dear beloved friend, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom, who was a great prophetic truth seeker and truth speaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. The book, Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth. Robert George is with us. Get the book, Seeking Truth, Speaking Truth. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot by it, a lot to consider, a lot to learn. At least there was for me going through it. And very, very blessed by it and blessed by having Dr. George here with us today. We've got one more segment to go, so stay tuned. We're going to get to that in a moment and see what comes out. But I'm going to ask a couple questions when we get back, but also, give some space for Dr. George to continue on. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Robert George. You can learn more about him and his good work at robertpgeorge.com, talking about his book, Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth, Law and Morality in Our Cultural Moment. A lot here that caught my attention in the book. One thing in chapter 15, universities shouldn't be ideological churches. Great essay. And in this, it starts off, you talk about how there was a Princeton University's program in gender and sexuality studies. This was a statement that was issued right after the Dobbs ruling, fiercely condemning the ruling. The director of the program, I guess, put this out. And, again, great essay fleshing out why that's a bad idea, regardless of what side you're coming from in terms of from an institutional perspective, a non-religious school in this case. And so, a lot of good things to think about there. But I wanted to draw attention and get your opinion on this, get your thoughts on this. It seems that so much has bubbled up into the culture from these sorts of programs throughout the colleges and universities, these gender and sexuality studies programs, women's studies programs. A lot that has occurred seems to have stemmed from ideas that started there and seemed very fringe at the time, and then they've become more and more popular as they send off more and more students from these colleges and universities off into the world believing these things. Does everything, I guess, what is your perspective on this? Does everything sort of begin as a battle of academics at the college level and then sort of bubble up as sort of this launch pad of ideas? Is that really, I guess, your experience on the university level? What is your thought on it?
I've been at this for 4 decades, and I can tell you a bit about it. So when I arrived at Princeton, it was my first and only full-time academic job. When I arrived back in the Middle Ages in 1985, people would say to me, well, don't worry about all the craziness that is going on in universities and the indoctrination that students are subjected to and the crazy ideas that get transmitted to them and all that. University is a 4-year period when students do crazy things and think crazy things and are taught crazy things. And then they go out into the real world and they have to grow up. They have to get a job. They have to pay taxes. They have a family. They have to take care of kids, and they sober up and they lay all that silly nonsense behind. Well, that seemed wrong to me when people said it back at the time. I worried that, well, no, they're not going to go out into the world and, sober up and start thinking sane things again. They're going to take these really crazy ideas out into the world and make them part of the fabric of our culture and our economic system and our political system. And regrettably and unfortunately, I was right about that. I wish I would have been wrong. Ideas that begin in the universities don't stay in the universities. They go out from the universities into the culture, into the economy. Who would have foreseen woke capital, woke corporations, corporations, displaying pride flags and transgender flags and, promoting these kinds of lifestyles in their advertising and promotions. And and things like that. Well, where did those ideas come from? They didn't come from the, General Motors Company or Kellogg cereal. They ended up there, but they came from universities, and very often, of course, from these so-called cultural studies, the pejorative way of referring to them as grievance studies programs within universities. So I'll tell you something. Parents, and not just parents, all citizens, all Americans have a real stake in what's going on in the universities. You should care about what's going on in the universities. And where the universities need reform, and they do, we should be supporting people across the board, whether you're professors or not. I mean, whatever you do, you should be engaged in the project of trying to reform universities. You should be supportive of that project. Now, there are good and bad ways to try to reform universities, and we could get into that. We're living at a time, of course, when the federal government is trying to reform universities, and I think it's doing some things that are sensible, and it's doing some things that I think are very dangerous. We could debate that, but we need to reform universities, and we need to do it right. We need to be careful about how we do it, but we do need to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've taught generations of students at Princeton University, at Harvard Law School as well. What is your advice to those thinking about studying law today? And I guess in particular, faithful Catholics that might be interested or considering going into law or politics. Are these paths you would encourage faithful Catholics to take on for the sake of the common good?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Go in with your eyes open, obviously. Realize that, you're going to be subjected to, possibly discrimination, prejudice if you don't go along with the mainstream opinion or the prevailing dogmas in the secular culture about this or that or the other thing. It's going to be hard, but it's worth it. These professions give you opportunities for serving the common good, for doing a lot of good for our fellow citizens, for our families, and for our fellow citizens. So, yeah, these are great. Go in with an open mind. Be willing to listen to views that challenge your own, including challenging the teachings of your faith. Engage. Say what's wrong when you think they're wrong. Be respectful, but don't allow yourself to be bullied and intimidated. Be a determined truth seeker, as I say, and be a courageous truth speaker. That's your mission. That's the mission of all of us. So I don't discourage students from engaging the culture. Quite the opposite. I'm very much here with John Paul II and Benedict the 15th and all the religious and other leaders who are encouraging us to engage the culture. Don't run away from it. Don't abandon it. Don't hide from it. But don't let it intimidate you. Don't allow yourself to be bullied. Engage it.
Excellent. Yeah. In lieu of any other questions I have, I think it's most valuable to give you the floor in the final couple minutes here. Anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up today?
Well, just to reiterate that I wrote the book for a general audience, and I hope people will have a look and see what they can find in the book that will be useful to them in the work that they do as citizens. And all of us, of course, are charged to do that work. None of us is exempted from being a good citizen. So I hope the book will help us to be good citizens. But again, if I can reiterate, please get the book into the hands of your college and high school age children and grandchildren. I think the book will be very helpful to them in dealing with the indoctrination that they will be subjected to, in many cases in high school, but certainly in colleges. I think the book will empower them to think for themselves, to think critically. It'll empower them to resist the intimidation, the bullying. It will give them arguments with which to confront people who dogmatically try to impose on them ideologies that run contrary to what their families and their religious communities have taught them. So the book is a kind of tool. It's a kind of empowering instrument to enable young people to get the most out of the education that they'll be receiving in formal institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I took a little peek into the that chapter on Solzhenitsyn, I believe there was a bit in there talking about the importance of the virtue of courage, of fortitude. Anything that you can share with us, a time where you particularly had a choice before you and you took that courageous path? Anything by example you can kind of share with us to inspire maybe any young people that might be listening today?
Well, let me not talk about myself here. Let me say a brief word about my father, because he was my hero and my role model. Now, my father was not an educated man. He didn't have a degree. He didn't go to college. He was drafted into World War II in 1944, right out of high school. He actually didn't finish high school. The school sent his parents a diploma. He didn't go to a graduation. He was off fighting in Normandy and in Brittany. But when I was 12 years old, I watched that man. I watched my father race across a 3/4-acre field to run into a burning house to rescue a man in a wheelchair. He had 5 kids. He had a family. He was putting everything at risk, but he was doing it because he perceived that there was a need there. This paraplegic man in the wheelchair was in grave danger from the fire. And my father thought, the thing I've got to do is I've got to get in there and rescue him. He took the risk of his own life and, would have left us fatherless. This was a serious business, but he did it. And that's always been inspiring to me. My dad can do that. And I can stand up against the bullies and intimidators who want to, impose their morality or their ideology on me. And I can stand up for what I think is true.
Well, God bless you all.